Genres are important, especially in this era with countless pieces of media across multiple mediums. Genres help people describe media for others in simple and compact ways. Saying a movie is a horror movie communicates a lot within just 2 syllables. Saying a movie is a psychological horror movie makes that more descriptive while only adding 1 word. I'll touch back on this later, but referring to a game as an RPG doesn't really narrow much down, at least with the current state of genres in gaming. Genres should be able to, for the most part, instantaneously describe something with accuracy and clarity. When searching for similar media of any medium, a good place to start is looking at the genre. For example, if someone likes John Carpenter's Halloween and wants to watch more things like it, then recommending an action movie like Transformers to them wouldn't be a good way to help them find similar media. Recommending The Ritual would be a better recommendation because it is also a horror movie. However, it still wouldn't be that great of one, because it's more folk horror as opposed to slasher horror. Recommending something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Scream would be a better recommendation due to the genres and subgenres being similar if not the same. The same applies to gaming, most notably with RPGs. Baldur's Gate 3, Bioshock 2, and Final Fantasy VI are all RPGs. Of course, there's a discrepancy that I'll get to later. If you want a CRPG, you'll go with Baldur's Gate 3. If you want a linear action RPG, you can play Bioshock. Don't worry, this is the last time I'll call Bioshock an RPG. And if you want a turn-based JRPG, you can, and should to be honest, play Final Fantasy VI. These 3 games vary so much in moment-to-moment gameplay, structure, and theme, which is why just calling games by their genre exclusively can be a bit misleading. Steam's tag system should be a great way to find games within genres, but of course there are inherent issues with it. Some people don't understand genres and what they mean, so they mistag genres, developers and players alike. The other day I saw a Reddit post commenting how hard it is to find immersive sims, like Prey, because the immersive sim genre tag is bogged down with actual simulators. In a reply, the original poster stated, "The immersive sim genre describes games that present players with certain problems and gives them multiple approaches to solve it. This usually devolves into shooting enemies and stacking boxes, but the spirit of the genre is about allowing players to approach each problem with a creative solution. Games like Deus Ex are considered to be immersive sims. Baldur's Gate 3 can be considered an immersive sim due to the fact that it gives players a myriad of ways to solve problems, but Euro Truck Simulator is a simulator game in which you drive a truck. It's not an immersive sim. Saying immersive sim is a simulator game, or vice versa, is like saying Call of Duty is a point-and-click game. Which it kind of vaguely is, if you stretch the definition. If genres are correctly communicated, people can be able to find what they want without any strain. And lastly, before we get into the meat of the video, I want to talk about another example outside of gaming. Monster Cat, a record label that I've been following for a while, has recently been marking releases as melodic bass because there are bass songs that have melodic elements, which, to keep it short, isn't entirely wrong, but the genre is more so a synergy between future bass and melodic dubstep. They said this was melodic bass when melodic bass more so describes stuff like ILLENIUM. Not melodic bass. Melodic bass. The problem is using a vague term to describe a genre instead of trying to be accurate. If you're looking for songs similar to the first one, you aren't gonna find much looking for melodic bass. If you're going to mark something, anything, as a genre, it should be accurate. If people want to find things within a genre, they shouldn't have to go through any extra hoops to find what they want. In any media, but mostly gaming, genre names can be replaced, overlapped with other genres, or maybe overtaken by new mechanics. Genres adapting can result in original aspects of a genre being killed off. This makes it so that older genres can be harder to find in their true form, and to some extent die out. I don't believe in saying that genres or games are dead. They can just be hidden under everyone's radar and, well, not gaining much traction because of other things like similar genres rising, gameplay mechanics getting replaced, and just the industry adapting. Seeing genres become less popular and, as a cause, more stagnant has happened to me a couple of times in the past few years. no new collectathons are really coming out, at least in my radar. The same goes for true survival horror. A game like Resident Evil 1 is something that can be hard to find, especially with tag searches just pulling up non-relevant games. The harder it is to find games of a dying genre, the less those games will likely sell, which makes it so that there are less of those games. Which means, well, you get the idea. True survival horror with an isometric camera, limited inventory, limited saves, exploration-focused gameplay, vaguely escape room structure, and all of that is hard to find. Sure, you can search the survival horror tag on Steam, but I honestly wish you luck. Curators, as stupid as they can help with finding these games, but they're really an underutilized feature that not many people know about or at least truly use. I get it. Gaming changes and adapts. Features in games like the original Resident Evil are hard to play around and not really accessible. Games need to adapt in order to stay relevant. But please, if I could just experience the Spencer Mansion once again for the first time, I would. Or at least, of course, something similar. Genres being hard to find via tags on Steam is not uncommon. Other affected tags include collectathons, immersive sims, arena shooters, and honestly a lot more. These tags lack games, or at least are bogged down with games that don't accurately define what one may be looking for. Take a look for yourself at each of the genres I just mentioned. Genres can also die out in the mainstream due to commodification of art. Instead of making games honoring a genre's origin, publishers may want games to go in a better direction for the masses. Resident Evil and Final Fantasy are fairly guilty of this throughout various times in their lifespan. True survival horror and older Final Fantasy-style JRPGs are good examples of genres kind of dying out, at least in a more advertised section of gaming. Sure, Tormented Souls and plenty of JRPGs exist, but people have to seek those games out a lot more due to a lower budget for promotional materials, and simply, a lot of games exist and can easily overshadow others. Games are a weird medium in that categorizing them takes a little more work than classifying something like books, movies, and even music. To accurately describe a game, you pretty much would need to at least state a game's main genre, subgenre, and most of the time theme. Gaming being as complicated as it is, there is a lot more variety and, well, options to describe most games. With games like Binding of Isaac, XCOM, Telltale's The Walking Dead, Mortal Kombat, and Call of Duty, games can vary significantly in ways of approaching how their play sessions occur. For example, Binding of Isaac is run-based, XCOM is a campaign, The Walking Dead is episodic, Mortal Kombat is an arcade game, and Call of Duty, at least its main campaign, is a story game. So play length may be important for describing the game. Games are usually described by the main genre, and often the description just stops there. In order to accurately describe most games, there needs to be a mention of subgenre. Action could mean I'm talking about Uncharted, Spec Ops: The Line, Monster Hunter, or Fallout. Subgenres help a ton when covering a game briefly. Uncharted is an action-adventure game with a treasure hunting theme. Spec Ops: The Line is an action shooter with a military theme. And I'm most definitely underselling the game by being vague on purpose. Monster Hunter is an action RPG, kind of, I'll mention this later, in which you fight boss-like monsters in a grounded fantasy setting and theme. Fallout is an action RPG with a post-apocalyptic theme. Categorizing games should first off be done with the main genre, then with equal importance categorized with the subgenre. Lastly, for this section, I just want to state my thoughts on the like and light suffixes. I think that if there's a clear distinction between like, lights, and the source genre, then we should use them. They have a couple of purposes. First off, like and light genres credit their source material and use inspiration from the source, something that we could use a little more of in gaming. I mean, you heard my thoughts on true survival horror dying down. Metroidvanias, Souls-likes, action roguelikes and lights, and survivor-likes can all be compared to their source within a reasonable extent. Secondly, these genres can easily name subsets of games that are easy to categorize, which should be the purpose of making most genres names anyway. Like and light suffixes are fine, but they need to be clearly defined and necessary to use. Calling Binding of Isaac a top-down action roguelike describes it quickly to people who know that an action roguelike is a run-based game where progress is reset on loss, the game is randomly generated, and the gameplay revolves around quick reactions, well, in a sense, dungeon crawling. The light suffix is where some people have problems, and while it's not set in stone, roguelites are normally agreed upon to have meta progression that the former lacks. For example, Rogue Legacy is a platforming action roguelite. The second, having Metroidvania elements, vaguely makes it a roguelite-vania. Words stew, but I think it does its job in communicating everything quickly and concisely. Of course, leaving variance in the genre on a game-to-game basis. Like and light genres make sense as long as they are vaguely established or can communicate the idea quickly. Making up a new term, for example, Resident Evil-like, can be done, but in reality requires the game or series that it originated from to be able to have a consistent description and to not be taken up by another genre name like survival horror as an example. Souls-like is a good genre in my opinion, or at least a subgenre of action-adventure RPG game. The problem is that there is a lot of potential for people to mistranslate what a Souls-like really means. To some, it may mean a difficult game. To others, it means there's bosses. If your game has a dodge roll, then it's a Souls-like, some think. And maybe to some, it just means that there's any influence of a Souls system. In my opinion, Souls-likes need to have 3 of 4 main things that are in every FromSoft Soulsborne game. A soul system, where they're lost in battle and spent in bonfires, punishing enemies and bosses that rely on reaction times and dodge patterns, a custom-crafted world with an exploration focus, and build variety. So if we use the 3 of 4 technique, we can say that Monster Hunter and Remnant are not Souls-likes, but they are close in different regards. On the topic of categorizing everything under one genre, it's time for me to finally talk about RPGs, and how much I dislike how massive of a range games just saying RPG describes. This is why I made the video, and is probably where the most problems in the topic of genre extends from. If you stretch the definition of RPG into a game where you play a role of a character, you can pretty much define every game as an RPG. Bloons Tower Defense is an RPG because you are playing the role of a monkey commander setting up forces to stop balloons. Phasmophobia is an RPG because you're playing the role of a ghost hunter. Baldur's Gate 3 is a role-playing game where... Wait, this one actually is a role-playing game? Okay, I can stop with a bit now. Pong is a... Okay, so role-playing games aren't just games where you're playing a role, right? You can customize your character's build, become part of the world, have an effect on the story, miss out on various content, or experience everything one way in one playthrough to do it all differently in another. The term RPG has been around since early gaming. Most games back in the day would be classified as a role-playing game without having much in common with RPGs now. Essentially, games were marketed as RPGs back then to emphasize how your character was your own, in order to market the game to the imaginative youth. An ad might say, "Have you ever wanted to be an astronaut? Well, now you can with Metroid. Take on the horrors of space in this role-playing game." Or probably something along those lines. However, calling Metroid an RPG now would just be inaccurate. RPGs now suffer from vague categorization. For games to be categorized as role-playing games, they only need to have a skill tree of sorts. Now, in my opinion, that should change. Skill trees are extremely common, and while they do add some customizability to how a game is played, they don't really correlate to playing a role. They only provide a little player choice. Role-playing games should, for the most part, only be classified on the impact a player has on the world, or how the world revolves around the character, not necessarily just the ability to customize a character and how they play. A good way to distinguish a game as a role-playing game, in my opinion, is a game where you play a role. not a predetermined character. In said role, you'd be able to have an input on the world around you. In Mass Effect, you don't play a predetermined character even though your name is fixed to Shepard. You get to make choices and shape the world around you as Shepard. All of that is to say that we need to be able to categorize games that are currently marked as RPGs into another genre. Maybe we could say that games with skill trees that focus on playstyle customization are playstyle malleable, or something that rolls off the tongue easier. Games with skill trees are not RPGs, but they tend to have a malleable playstyle. BioShock is not an RPG, but you can customize your playstyle with the skills you build and through binary karma-esque decisions in the story. Maybe we need to define games with loose RPG structures and game elements like skill trees and build customization as RPG lights. I know some people will hate me for saying that, but it's the best solution I can come up with other than just deal with it, which is a lot of the reason why genres can be a problem. It's not enough of a problem, so most people don't care enough to try and make a change. Okay, so one more thing. What even are JRPGs, or Japanese role-playing games? Are they just turn-based games? Are they party-based games? How do they play? This is kind of a genuine question. I haven't played too many, but I know there's a lot of variation in what different JRPGs offer, especially in the AAA space. Story structures and themes are common in popular JRPGs, turn-based combat or something vaguely similar is common, and party systems are also common, but there's a lot more variation. The main reason I bring up JRPGs is, why are they called Japanese role-playing games? It kind of doesn't make sense unless if we are using the old RPG naming terms because you're playing a character, and, well, the developers or themes in the game often originate from Japan. Anyway, I don't really know what to say about the whole JRPG genre because I'm not too far into that sphere of gaming. But at least I think it's more clear than what RPGs are going through as a genre. I'd love to hear from you guys about your opinions on JRPGs as a genre, and if you think they should be redefined, or if they're fine where they are. So, this section isn't to say that genres are wrong. Gaming being a subjective media doesn't warrant saying RPG games are bad now. Mostly, the genre RPG doesn't make sense as it is. For the next bit of this video, I want to lay out some genres, rename some genres, and just say my part on what, in my mind, categorizes some popular games and genres. I obviously have biases, and I can't really be an authority on this, having not played most games across all genres, but here goes nothing. RPGs should be games where you play a role in the world, not just a character on a heavily predetermined adventure. RPGs should have inspiration from tabletop RPGs, with player freedom, immersive worlds, side quests, character customization, and replayability within the narrative. Honestly, most current action role-playing games are barely role-playing games, and the fact that these games have skill trees does not do enough to justify calling them role-playing games in any real way. True RPGs are more of a niche genre, and the term RPG should be done away with for most games, or at least decline in usage and popularity. Games with skill trees or build variety should be called something like playstyle malleable games. Horizon Zero Dawn is not quite an RPG, and shouldn't really be called one. Sure, there are RPG elements, but you're still playing as a character rather than a player-made role. Maybe for action games that are open-ended in a way like RPGs, we could just call these open-ended action games, or rather an action game with subgenre or elements of open-ended game design. I also feel, with gaming being an ever-evolving media, that we should be quick to make new genre names and introduce more ways to classify games quicker. Games like BioShock, Dishonored, Deathloop, and Atomic Heart are all games with both guns in one hand and powers in the other. This niche of FPS games could be labeled as power shooters. Another niche that has seen growth are games inspired by Vampire Survivors. These games are somewhat plaguing the Steam tag system due to how easy they are to make and how popular they were after Vampire Survivors' strong launch. Searching for roguelikes or bullet hells will likely lead to finding a varying amount of games like Vampire Survivors, or should we call them survivor-likes, or even bullet hellings. When a new game comes out and its uniqueness inspires other genres, a priority should be to invent a name for that genre of game. The slower we are to make, and the less we enforce new genre names, the more likely it is that we will have to deal with more action roguelike situations with games like Vampire Survivors. With the nondescript but oh-so-clear action roguelike tag, you don't know how the game will function from a gameplay perspective, but you know it's far more than likely quick and run-based with varying builds due to procedural generation. This could be Isaac, or could be Vampire Survivors. These games vary significantly, and grouping them within the same genre can bloat up genre tags, even though they both fit. Not to be confused with arcade games from arcade machines, the arcade genre pretty much sums up most games that lack a narrative, are designed to be played in short round-like bursts, and lack meta progression. Overcooked is an arcade game with a cooking theme, while Cooking Sim is a simulator game with a cooking theme. Arcade, as a genre term, is kind of a catch-all for short experiences. That's why arcade racers and arcade shooters are genres that exist. Lastly, I want to talk about the adventure genre, what I feel like it means, and how it can be confused and also overlap with the adventure theme. Adventure in gaming is both a genre and a theme. Often, these two overlap. Most games with thematic adventure elements seem to play similarly enough to be included in the same genre, despite adventure being a vague term. Adventure seems about as vague as role-playing game when you're just boiling things down to its early definition. Simply a game where something happens in the main character's life, taking them on an adventure, can be classified as an adventure game. Adventure games are where you're playing as a character instead of a role, and that character goes on an on-the-rails, linear, predetermined adventure. Adventure as a genre is a huge category that spans across gaming. Most single-player story games classify as adventure games in my eyes. Adventure games can vary in theme significantly. Uncharted and Horizon are games that have discovery and more of a literal adventure theme, while games like A Plague Tale and Resident Evil 4 are much darker thematically throughout. Adventure as a theme is a lot more specific than the genre. The genre pretty much covers every story game. The theme doesn't really. Well, after all that time talking about the importance of communicating genres and making sure we put everything in the right box, how do we make it fair for more experimental games that not only don't fit securely in any box, but also make their own box? Well, that's the problem. I don't know. I love inventive games. Some of my favorite games are hard to fit in genres, and there's a lot of interesting games coming out that also don't nicely fit into a genre. One of my favorite games, if not my favorite game, Fury, is unique in that it doesn't fit into any subgenre. It's a game where you fight boss after boss in custom arenas. The game focuses on difficulty, dodging patterns, and also parrying when in melee combat. You could call this game a bullet hell, but you'd kind of be wrong. You could call this game a boss rush or something like that, but therein lies the problem. That would mostly be a new genre, and not even that popular of one. The game would be hard to find in a genre that doesn't really exist. Games that don't definitively neatly fit into a genre are harder to find and harder to accurately categorize. In some ways, more genres can hurt games for being experimental, but more genres are needed so that games are not buried under a ton of other games that don't really fit into the genre. Bringing back true survival horror. Without a proper way of sorting out the genre, games like Dead by Daylight, Left 4 Dead, DayZ, The Forest, and Dying Light will usually show up in searches before true survival horror games like Resident Evil 1, Tormented Souls, or Clock Tower. Sure, some of these games are survival games with horror themes, but survival horror is different from horror survival. Pinball Spire, Overcooked, Fury, The Hex, Return of the Obra Dinn, Phasmophobia, and Hardspace Shipbreaker are all indie games that don't really fit into any genre super well, and as a cause can suffer from not being promoted. There was also a point where AAA games and IPs could also have variants in playstyle a lot more than now. Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, originally released on the PlayStation Portable, is a good example when games from a series could be experimental in comparison to the main series games. Larger developers are less likely to make games gamey nowadays, which may be due to experimental games not selling well due to how they don't nicely fit into genres. Should we have a tag or genre called experimental indie that lets games of whatever variety flourish? Because when you think about it, there's problems with trying to put experimental games in pre-existing genres. What's worse, being too vague with the genre so that searching through bloat makes it harder to find games truly fitting that genre, or having genre be too specific, which turns many experimental games into vague, hard-to-find titles. What about games where there's more at play, meaning some psychological horror games that interact with files on your computer or have unique game elements that should not be spoiled? To avoid listing any examples, I'll just say something like the Psycho Mantis fight, or some elements from other hit indie games that are seemingly insidious. Some problems with genres arise from games being unique and shown genres potentially leading to a spoiled experience. You'd need to catch people's interest, but stay vague enough, and genre tags won't really work due to them alluding to content and ruining potential surprises. So what should we do about genres, or what can we do? Genres are a balancing act. We could choose to keep things vague, allowing and promoting variants, but risking games being hidden under a massive pool of non-similar games. Or we can have genres be more restricted so that people can find exactly what they're looking for, which as a cause can lower promotion of more experimental games. Push too far in either direction, and genres are either not specific enough to matter, or are too specific and punish developer experimentation. Steam and their tag system has a way of being great for finding games. Tags on Steam are separated into multiple sections, including top-level genres, subgenres, visuals and viewpoints, themes and moods, and features. If you wanted to try and find a specific game, you could, but that can just as easily fail with player-created tags and games that don't have all the correct tags. Searching isometric and survival in the horror tag, or any combination of the two, will tend to not pull up a survival horror game with an isometric camera. Tags on Steam need to somehow be improved and enforced for games to be searched effectively. Plenty of games exist with any variation of tags, playstyles, etc. that you could possibly imagine. But with the way things currently are with Steam tags, finding games in already unpopular styles and genres can be a nightmare. The only thing we can do about this, at least on Steam, is to make sure we tag games we come across with relevant tags, so that in the future, we can find games with all design choices with effectiveness and ease. The way genres should work. There is a fairly effective solution to finding games that I conveniently waited to the end of the video to say, and to the end of the script writing process to remember, but we can also Google games. If we can't do a quick search on Steam to not be able to find exactly what we're looking for, we could always go to Google or just ask around forums for games that have things in common with what we're looking for. However, these methods can be more likely to recommend games you've already heard of or already played. No method is perfect when it comes to searching for games, but there are options and ways we could potentially improve the game searching process. I know this was all kind of just a mess of ideas, but honestly that's a brief explanation about how I feel like genres as a whole. Some of them are a mess of ideas. Genre definitions aren't clear, and that can be a problem. There are less pure role-playing games than you'd expect. Most games labeled survival horror are honestly kind of mislabeled, and the Steam tag system can be effective, but usually it's not that great. Genres need to be definitive, but find a way to do so without punishing new genres for trying to emerge, or new games from being experimental. Thank you all for watching. This video has had the quickest turnaround so far, and I hope I can continue at this pace. But as of now, I don't even know what topic I'm doing next. Oops. That being said, if you want to see more videos from me, you can look at the other videos I've uploaded and subscribe to the channel for more. Any interaction on the video, whether it be shares, likes, comments, is greatly appreciated for my ego and the algorithm. But let's be honest, mostly the algorithm. That being said, I hope you all have a great day, night, or whatever. Until next time, later days.